So today this is video diary number 3, and it's related to my master's. So I am working on my master's. I'm doing these videos more for myself, just saying, putting them on YouTube is kind of makes it feel like people are gonna see, but I know nobody's gonna see this really, so anyways, for my project, I'm doing it on bioretention basin, so it's a type of low impact development practice that is being implemented more and more. And specifically what I was doing today was calibration curves. So we're going to be installing some weirs on the exit point of the basins. So it's necessary right now to go to the lab and determine the rating curve of the weirs. So this involves passing a certain flow through the conduit. So we have a piece of conduit, we have a section of conduit in the lab, and we're installing a compound weir. So this actually includes a triangular weir, V-notch, as well as a rectangular, so it's a 2-in-1. And the way you normally calibrate weirs is that you pass a known flow through the conduit and measure the height. So the weir is actually the primary measuring device, and then the secondary measuring device is whatever device you're using to measure the flow, the water height. So this can be a pressure transducer, a bubble, sort of bubble height measuring device, or even just using a ruler. So you pass the flow through, and you know the flow, and then you measure, you have the device that's measuring the water height, and this will give you a set of data points. So you start with a low value. So you would start with, I would say your initial value where you would start taking measurements is as the water first starts leaking over the V-notch. So there is a certain amount, so there's a certain height between the bottom of the conduit and the bottom of the V-notch point. So that the water actually needs to fill up high enough to be able to pass that point. And then once it passes, it's going to form a sort of waterfall flowing over, and you want to reach a state of equilibrium. So when you're in the lab, you want to make sure that the flow has stabilized. So you would start increasing the flow until it passes over the crest, and then you would let it stabilize, and you would have a stable crest and a stable height measurement. So you would look at your pressure transducer, it would be reading a stable value for the height, and the flow would be a stable value. So once your system is equilibrium, then you take that height measurement and the flow measurement, and you incrementally increase this until you reach basically the top of the conduit. So you're gonna have an incremental increase of height going through the V-notch, and then it's gonna slowly start, once it's reached the top of the V-notch weir, it's gonna start spilling over the rectangular part. So again, you have a rectangular weir and then a V. So it's kind of like this. You start with a V at the bottom, so a V-notch, and then it becomes a rectangle. So the rectangle is actually to measure those higher flows, and the V-notch is to measure the lower flows. Now you're gonna basically incrementally increase the height, and then once it's reached the top of the V-notch, the water is actually gonna start spilling over that horizontal part. So then you're gonna again incrementally increase, all the while taking measurements. You just have to be aware that while the flow is in that transition zone, it's gonna be a little bit unpredictable. It's not going to be as exact as when you're totally in the rectangular or totally in the triangular part. So just have to be a little bit careful about that. And then and then you're actually going to graph. So you're going to graph these values. So you're going to graph the height that you measured versus the flow. And then you're going to create a curve. So you're going to have a curve, and you're going to stick a trend line on that curve, and that's going to give you the relationship between the water height and the flow. So it is possible that you would actually use two different equations. So in one study that I found, they used the cone equation to best fit the notch, because basically what you have to understand is that until the V notch is full, so until the water actually reaches the base of the rectangular part, it's basically a V notch weir. So as it's starting up, filling, it doesn't know that there's also a rectangular part. So it's basically like having a V notch weir. And for V notch weirs, there are already equations that have been developed to characterize, to create the connection between the height and the flow. So there are already equations that exist. There's a general one, and there's also a cone equation. So that's just an empirical equation that was done by a scientist. But the real reason you need to do this calibration is because once you've gone over the V crest, you're entering into unknown territory. So it's not exactly a rectangular weir because you have that V notch part. So that's why it's necessary to take all these values and plot them and develop the equations, the equation for it through the trend line. However, in one study that I saw, they did not necessarily use all the data points. So they actually just separately determined. They use the cone equation for the V notch part, and then for the rectangular part, they just best fit just that data. So they did not take the first triangular weir part. They best fitted just the data of the rectangular part, and that's how they determined their trend line, their equation relating the two. So it's important I develop this Excel sheet for tomorrow. And what I'm going to do now is, because I was just using one study that was from 1960 and it went kind of detailed, so it was kind of worrying me a little bit because I wasn't sure, because they did not end up determining an equation for that middle part. They kind of concluded, try not to use this weir for heights that are in that, at that point. For them specifically, it was between 1 foot and 1.1. So they kind of just concluded, try not to use those heights. However, I don't really have that control over telling the rain, just don't rain that certain level that'll go in that zone where we don't have an equation for it. You can't really tell rain that, right? So that was kind of worrying me, because I had just been reading that one, so I thought that I wouldn't be able to develop an equation for that part, and that maybe it was not a good idea to use a compound weir because of that transition zone. However, then when I looked at another article, this one was just overly simplified. They literally just, took the data, plotted, fit a power series to it, and that's what they used. They really did not try to understand if there's instability somewhere, any of these things. So it's kind of interesting to see the more complicated and detailed one, and then someone who does something super simple. It kind of, wakes you up to that idea that there's different ways to do it, and I was already starting with the more complicated way. So that means I've already probably thought about it further than you would just think about it at the beginning, So that kind of helped. But now I just want to do a little bit more reading, just to sort of look at another. I wanted to look specifically at bioretention basins, because I realized the articles I was looking at were either for streams or just they were bigger, so they were more, because these things can actually be used for dams. They use weirs. They don't necessarily use these weirs for dams because they're kind of small. But I would like to read some studies where they actually used compound weir specifically to monitor bioretention basins. And I think that is what would really help me out, because that's actually what my project is about. So that's what I'm going to do now. It is now, what time is it? 9:22. I don't know if I've gotten enough done for my liking. I'm a little bit tired, but I need to finish reading those things. I think I'm going to do the meeting minutes. I really hate doing meeting minutes, especially when I'm late. However, I think that's what I'm going to do right now, because I really wanted to finish that today. I had wanted to work on swim stuff, but I don't know if I'll have time. So I think I'm just going to... Anyways, now I'm just talking for myself. So anyways, I hope that helped. If you ever need to calibrate, you can put some comments down below and ask me questions on what links I use and different stuff. So maybe I'll put the links down there of the papers I was using. So yeah, thanks for listening. Bye.